For 20 years, the USS Gerald R was a promise. It was a blueprint worth $13 billion for the future of naval warfare, and critics called it overbudget, overengineered, and overdue. The Navy commissioned it in 2017. It spent years in testing, working out problems with its elevators, its launch systems, and its radar. Military analysts debated whether a ship this expensive could ever justify its cost, whether the age of the aircraft carrier was already over. Then, on February the 28th, 2026, that debate ended. Operation Epic Fury began in the early hours of that Friday morning, a joint American and Israeli military campaign that would become the largest strike operation ever conducted against Iran. Sailing in the Eastern Mediterranean, finally doing the one thing it was built to do, was the Ford. The drills were over, and it was launching combat sorties into hostile airspace for the first time in its life. What happened over the next 6 days answered a question military strategists had been asking for decades. What actually happens when a nation that built its defenses around 1970s technology comes face to face with a warship designed for 2050? The answer, it turns out, was not a battle. It was a demonstration. To understand why the Ford matters, you have to understand what came before it. The United States Navy has operated aircraft carriers since World War II. The Nimitz class, which entered service in 1975, became the backbone of American naval power for half a century. 10 of them were built. Each one displaces over 100,000 tons of water. Each one carries roughly 75 aircraft. They are floating cities with their own zip codes, powered by nuclear reactors that can run for 20 years without refueling. The Nimitz class was designed during the Cold War. Its steam catapults, the systems that launch aircraft off the flight deck, use technology that dates back to the 1950s. Its weapons elevators, the lifts that bring bombs and missiles from the magazines deep in the hull up to the flight deck, run on hydraulic systems that are maintenance nightmares. Every generation of carrier improved on the last, but the fundamental architecture stayed the same for decades. The Ford was supposed to change all of that, and not just incrementally. The Navy wanted to rebuild the carrier from the keel up. Construction began in 2009 at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, the only shipyard in the Western Hemisphere capable of building a nuclear aircraft carrier. The hull alone took years. The ship stretches 1,106 feet from bow to stern, longer than the Empire State Building is tall. It displaces over 100,000 tons fully loaded. 2 Bechtel A-1B nuclear reactors generate 3 times the electrical power of a Nimitz-class carrier, and that extra power is not a luxury. Every major system on the Ford runs on electricity instead of steam or hydraulics, and each one of those systems was designed from scratch. The most visible change sits on the flight deck. The electromagnetic aircraft launch system, known as EMALS, replaced the old steam catapults entirely, where a Nimitz carrier uses pressurized steam to hurl aircraft from 0 to flying speed in under 3 seconds. The Ford uses electromagnetic energy. Linear induction motors accelerate a shuttle along a track, and the launch force can be precisely calibrated for each aircraft type. A heavy FA-18 Super Hornet gets one setting. A lighter E-2D Hawkeye surveillance plane gets another. The steam catapults on older carriers had one basic power level. They slammed everything forward with roughly the same force, which put enormous stress on lighter airframes over time. EMALS changes the math completely. The acceleration is smoother, the wear on aircraft drops significantly, and critically, the cycle time between launches gets faster. The Ford can generate 160 aircraft sorties per day during sustained combat operations. A Nimitz tops out around 120. That is a 33% increase in combat power from a single ship. In a high-intensity conflict where air superiority depends on putting more aircraft over the target faster than the enemy can respond, that 33% means the difference between controlling the sky and fighting for it. Below the flight deck, another revolution was supposed to be happening. The advanced weapons elevators use electromagnetic linear motors to move ordnance from the ship's magazines to the flight deck. On a Nimitz carrier, old hydraulic elevators haul bombs and missiles up through the ship at what the Navy politely calls a deliberate pace. The Ford's elevators were designed to move that same ordnance roughly 3 times faster. In combat, when aircraft are burning through weapons at a rate that demands constant rearming, elevator speed determines how quickly the ship can sustain its sortie rate. A carrier that can launch 160 sorties means nothing if it cannot arm the planes fast enough to keep them flying. These elevators became the Ford's most infamous problem. They were years behind schedule. The technology was genuinely new, not adapted from an existing system, but invented for this ship. Critics pointed to the elevators as proof that the Navy had tried to incorporate too much unproven technology into a single hull. By the time the Ford was commissioned in July 2017, not all of the elevators were operational. It took additional years of testing and fixes before the full system worked as designed, but by February 2026, they were working, and they were working under conditions no test could replicate. The third major system is the one that ties everything together. The Ford carries a dual-band radar system that combines an S-band volume search radar with an X-band precision tracking radar into a single integrated suite. In plain terms, the ship can track over 800 airborne targets simultaneously across a vast area. It can distinguish between an incoming ballistic missile and a commercial airliner at ranges that cover the entire Persian Gulf. It feeds targeting data to the carrier escorts, the cruisers and destroyers that form a protective ring around the ship, and it coordinates with the E-2D, Advanced Hawkeye aircraft orbiting above the strike group to build a continuous picture of everything moving through the sky within hundreds of miles. The dual-band radar functions as the nervous system of the entire carrier strike group. It was operating at full capacity aboard the Ford when Operation Epic Fury began. The strategic picture on February 28th looked like this. The Ford and its strike group were positioned in the eastern Mediterranean west of the conflict zone, but well within striking range of targets across Iran. This placement was deliberate. The eastern Mediterranean kept the Ford outside the immediate threat envelope of Iran's anti-ship ballistic missiles. The weapons Tehran had spent years developing specifically to threaten American carriers in the Persian Gulf. By staying west, the Ford could project power without sailing into the narrow waters where Iran's defensive strategy was concentrated. Simultaneously, the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class carrier, was operating in the Arabian Sea to the south of Iran, and the Lincoln carried its own air wing and its own strike group of escorts. Together, the Ford and the Lincoln created what military planners call a naval vice. 2 axes of attack from 2 different directions forced Iran to divide its defensive attention and created gaps that neither carrier would face alone. The first strikes hit Iranian targets in the early morning hours. Aircraft from the Ford's air wing, primarily FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornets, launched from the electromagnetic catapults and headed east, carrying precision-guided munitions. The targets included Iranian air defense batteries, missile launch sites, command and control facilities, and naval installations along the Persian Gulf coast. They were supported by EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft that jammed Iranian radar systems, and by E-2D Hawkeyes providing airborne early warning and battle management. The tempo was relentless. The Ford's air wing was cycling aircraft at a rate that older carriers simply could not sustain. Launch, recover, rearm, refuel, launch again. The electromagnetic catapults handled the pace without the downtime that steam catapults require for recharging between cycles. The advanced weapons elevators kept ordnance flowing to the flight deck. The dual-band radar tracked everything in the sky, while the ship's Combat Information Center coordinated with the Lincoln's air wing operating from the south. Iran's response came on March 1st. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a salvo of ballistic missiles targeting the carrier strike groups. Iranian state media reported direct hits on American vessels. Revolutionary Guard commanders appeared on television claiming they had struck the Ford itself. They said the great American carrier was burning in the Mediterranean. U.S. Central Command released a statement the same day. The missiles, they said, did not even come close. The carrier strike group's layered defense system, which includes SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors fired from Aegis-equipped destroyers and cruisers, engaged the incoming threats at altitude. The Ford's dual-band radar had tracked the launches from the moment the missiles left Iranian soil, feeding targeting data to the escort ships in real time. By the time the warheads reached their terminal phase, they had already been intercepted or had fallen harmlessly into open water. This was the scenario Iran's military planners had feared. Tehran had invested heavily in ballistic missiles as its primary deterrent against American carriers. Tehran's logic was straightforward. Aircraft carriers are large, slow-moving targets. A saturation attack with enough missiles should overwhelm any defense. But the theory assumed missile accuracy and volume that Iran could not achieve against a strike group with the Ford's sensor suite, feeding the most advanced missile defense systems in the world. The gap between what Iran's missiles were designed to do and what they actually accomplished on March 1st tells you everything about the technology divide at the heart of this conflict. Iran's military infrastructure is a patchwork. Some systems are modern, purchased from Russia or China, or developed domestically. But much of the country's defense architecture was built in an era when the primary threat was Saddam Hussein's Iraq, not the full weight of American carrier aviation. The Tor M1 air defense systems that Iran purchased from Russia were designed in the 1980s. The older Hawk missile batteries, originally American-made and sold to Iran before the 1979 revolution, date back even further. Iran has upgraded and modified these systems over the decades, but the fundamental technology is a generation or two behind what it now faces. The Iranian Navy presents an even starker mismatch. Its fleet includes a handful of frigates and corvettes, numerous fast attack craft, and a submarine force of mostly smaller coastal boats. For years, Iran's naval strategy has relied on swarming tactics, the idea that dozens of small, fast boats armed with missiles and rockets could overwhelm a carrier strike group through sheer numbers in the confined waters of the Strait of Hormuz. But the Ford was not in the Strait of Hormuz. It was in the open Mediterranean, beyond the range of those fast attack boats, and the Iranian naval vessels that did venture out to challenge the operation were met by the carrier strike group's escorts, the destroyers and cruisers carrying Harpoon anti-ship missiles and naval guns that outranged anything in Iran's fleet. Within 6 days of combat, over 20 Iranian naval vessels had been destroyed or disabled. The swarming strategy that looked menacing on paper dissolved against ships that could track and engage multiple targets simultaneously at ranges the Iranian boats could not close. Across those same 6 days, the combined air campaign systematically degraded Iran's air defense network across all 24 provinces. Each sortie targeted specific radar installations, missile batteries, and communication nodes that connected Iran's air defense into a unified system. Once enough nodes were knocked out, the system could no longer function as a network. Individual batteries might still operate, but they were isolated, unable to coordinate, unable to see the full picture of what was coming. Complete air superiority followed quickly. The Ford's contribution to this outcome cannot be separated from the strike group that surrounds it. A carrier never fights alone. The Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the Ford's escort carry the Aegis combat system, the most capable naval air defense system on the planet. Together, the strike group creates overlapping zones of protection, from short-range systems that handle close-in threats to medium-range missiles designed to intercept aircraft and cruise missiles, to long-range interceptors built specifically to kill ballistic warheads at altitude and beneath the surface. At least one Los Angeles-class or Virginia-class attack submarine provides protection against undersea threats that the surface ships might not detect. This layered approach is what made Iran's missile strike on March 1st futile. The ballistic missiles had to pass through multiple defensive rings, each one designed to catch what the previous ring missed. The Ford's radar saw them first, the Aegis ships engaged them next, and if anything had gotten through both layers, the close-in weapon systems on the ships themselves provided a final barrier. Nothing got through to the Ford or any ship in the strike group. There is a broader question embedded in all of this, one that extends beyond Operation Epic Fury and beyond Iran. For years, military analysts have debated whether the aircraft carrier is obsolete. The argument goes like this: carriers are massive, expensive targets. Hypersonic missiles are getting faster and harder to intercept. China and Russia are developing weapons specifically designed to sink carriers from hundreds of miles away. Why build a $13 billion ship that a single missile could theoretically destroy? The Ford's performance in February and March 2026 does not settle that debate entirely. Iran is not China. Its missile technology is not comparable to what Beijing is developing. The anti-ship ballistic missiles Iran fired at the carrier group were a generation behind the DF-21D and DF-26 systems that China has built for exactly this purpose. But what the Ford did demonstrate is that the carrier, updated with 21st century technology, remains an extraordinarily potent instrument detriment of power projection. The ability to park an airfield within striking range of any coastline in the world, sustain 160 sorties per day, defend itself against ballistic missile attack, and coordinate with a second carrier strike group across an entire theater of operations is something no other weapons system on Earth can replicate. The electromagnetic catapults worked under combat conditions. The advanced weapons elevators kept the flight deck fed with ordnance at a pace that older carriers could not match. The dual-band radar tracked hundreds of targets simultaneously and fed the data in real time to the ships defending the group. Every system that had been questioned during the Ford's long and troubled development program performed when it mattered. It took 20 years from concept to combat, $13 billion, and countless congressional hearings filled with critical reports and headlines about cost overruns and technical failures, and then 6 days in the Eastern Mediterranean validated the entire investment. Whether the aircraft carrier remains viable against a peer competitor like China is a question that Operation Epic Fury does not fully answer. That question will be shaped by technologies that do not yet exist, by missiles that are still being tested, and by electronic warfare capabilities that are still classified. The ocean of the future may belong to unmanned systems, to submarine-launched hypersonic weapons, and to platforms we cannot yet imagine. But in February 2026, the USS Gerald R. Ford did exactly what it was designed to do. The Ford went to war. The electromagnetic catapults launched more aircraft faster, with better coordination and better defense than any carrier in history. And when Iran threw everything it had at the strike group, nothing came close. The age of the supercarrier is not over, it just entered a new chapter. If this is the kind of breakdown you come here for, hit subscribe. I cover military technology and defense analysis every week.